Hey guys, it's Jay. Welcome to week 4 of your Pacific Northwest weekend update. All right, starting us off in Washington, we have your UW Huskies who faced Cal and won 59 to 32. Huskies win. Right from the start, the Huskies had a pick six to go up 7-0, and then the defense forced a 3-and-out in which punt returner Rome Adunze returned the punt for a touchdown to go up 14 to nothing. Yes, that's correct. We were 6 minutes into game time and 45 minutes since warm-ups when UW's best asset, their offense, was still yet to hit the field, yet they were already up 14 to nothing. This pretty much sums it up. UW is a juggernaut. They have a defense that's pretty legit to back it up, although the game was against Cal. But it makes you wonder, do they have enough to go undefeated for the whole year? Let's figure it out. The Huskies player of the game was Michael Penix, who went 19 of 25 for 304 yards, 4 touchdowns, but had 1 interception. UW will play Arizona next week. Over to the other side of the state where WSU played Oregon State, in which I had last week predicted it was going to be the game of the week. I was pretty close to my score as I predicted Wazoo would win 42 to 35. To be exact, I said, I just think WSU is too explosive to win this game. However, if OSU can get this game to be a ground and pound type of style, I think they win since they like that style. Well, it felt like this game was kind of two halves, right? WSU's game was the first half where all of Wazoo could do no wrong as Cam Ward threw 3 touchdowns, rushed for 1, and missed just 1 pass the entire half. And as I predicted, Wazoo was too explosive for Oregon State. On the flip side, we get to the second half, more specifically the fourth quarter, where Oregon State was able to ground and pound the ball and dominated on their way to 21 points. Now, WSU's defense overall was able to shut down Oregon State's prize QB transfer, DJU. Okay? Now, I'm not saying he's bad, but he was shut down completely and disappeared in a big game, which, if you remember back in his Clemson days, was something that was somewhat of an issue. Okay? DJU went 17 of 34 for 198 yards and an interception. Now, Oregon State's player of the game, I have to say, is Deshaun Fenwick. He went for 11 carries, 101 yards, and 3 touchdowns. WSU's player of the game, Josh Kelly. He had 8 receptions for 159 yards, 3 touchdowns, and did this while stepping in for an injured Lincoln Victor. Let's also not remember, he had 2 amazing one-handed catches. OSU will welcome the Utes to Corvallis next weekend, in which they hope they can get back on track. WSU has a long bye this next week. Let's go over to Cheney, Washington, shall we? Your Eastern Washington Eagles played UC Davis and won 27 to 24. What a nice win for Eagle Nation. The Eagles are now 11-0 against UC Davis all time, and they weren't going to let this game get away from them and possibly become 10-1. No. They set the tone from the start of the game when Eagles cornerback Marlon Jones Jr. jumped a little hitch route and took it back for a pick six, which, by the way, he's done in back-to-back weeks. Now, with under 3 minutes to play, the Aggies moved the ball into Eastern Territory, but they stalled at the 14-yard line. They were setting up for a kick, thinking, all right, if we can get this thing 27-27, we'll go to OT and let OT handle it. Not so fast. Big D tackle Isaiah Perez was able to get his forearm up in the play and blocked the kick. Player of the game, Kakoa Visperis, went 22 of 31 for 208 yards. He is coming into his own and playing extremely well. Eastern will play Idaho next week. On to Central Washington. Central Washington played the Western Oregon team and won 17-7. Back-to-back wins for the Wildcats. After a first quarter in which neither team could score, the Wildcats broke through, scoring 10 points in the second quarter. From there, the Wildcats played staunch defense and capitalized on all the mistakes that Western Oregon made. Western Oregon was beaten all 3 phases of the game. I don't know if they even have a player of the game. Now, this may be controversial, but I'm going to give a shout out to a guy who balled out. Junior safety Tanner Volk had 2 interceptions. Now, normally, this would guarantee you a player of the game, but The guy who won this player of the game is an absolute stud. While most Central fans prefer he doesn't even touch the field, the fans of the other team really hope he doesn't touch a field. If you haven't figured it out by now, the player of the game is redshirt sophomore punter Dan Stewart. Now, Dan had 7 punts for 252 yards, averaging 36 yards per punt. When you can flip the field like this consistently, good things happen. Central will travel to Silver City next week to take on Western New Mexico. Western Oregon will take on West Texas A&M. Now, your Pacific Northwest Christian College played your PLU Lutes, and they won 26-20. Now, Bill Templeton in our podcast with him, he mentioned how he, quote, may not be the right guy, may not be the long-term guy for PNWCC, but he's the right guy for right now. Well, he couldn't be more correct. But I think you have to give this team a little bit more credit than right now in the future. Bill has these guys playing at an extremely high level in just what is their second year. Well, the future may be uncertain. I hope that Bill stays for the long term because he's building a good culture, has his team playing at a high level, and they seem to be doing no wrong. My votes are on Bill to stay at PNWCC for a long time. On to Oregon. Your Oregon Ducks played Colorado, and wow, they won 42-6. I didn't think Oregon was going to win like that, but they outplayed Colorado on every single aspect of the game. Colorado's coach might have a little bit more swag, but that's the only place where Colorado wins. Now, the whole game ended with a dominant victory. The whole game ended with a dominant victory. But check out these stats from the first half. Oregon scored 35 points with little to no pushback. Colorado was held to 56 passing yards and minus 35 rushing yards. That is total and utter domination. They sacked the quarterback 6 times. Make no mistake, this game was never in doubt. Not for a single second. The second that ball was kicked off, Oregon drove right down the field. This game was over. Player of the game, Bo Nix. Who else would it be? He went 28 of 33 for 276 yards and 3 touchdowns. Oregon's going to play Stanford next week. Your Portland State Vikings played Cal Poly and won 59-21. Is this the same Portland State team we've been talking about all year? Because 2 weeks ago, they were getting mollywopped. Now, past 2 weeks, they've been mollywopping. Maybe teams from Oregon all decided to go hard in the first half. Okay? Because Portland State certainly did. The Vikings returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown, then proceeded to dominate the first half with stats like this. On offense, 52 points and 340 rushing yards. On defense, 6 tackles for loss and 2 forced turnovers. Again, game in no doubt. Player of the game, Joby Mallory, who had 11 runs for 119 yards and 2 touchdowns. Portland State will head to Bozeman next week to play against Montana State. Your Eastern Oregon Mountaineers played Rocky Mountain College and lost 7-13. Now, the Mountaineers lost a tough game against a very good Rocky Mountain College team. But talk about coming out hot. Rocky Mountain scored on back-to-back possessions while forcing Eastern Oregon to do a 3-and-out in between those possessions. Now, the Battling Bears defense was so good they allowed just 16 yards in the entirety of the first quarter. Late in the fourth, Eastern Oregon had a chance to tie it up, but were unable to do so as the Bears once again had a crucial stop, getting a near sack, which forced an incompletion on the last play of the game. The Rocky player of the game is Zaire Wilcox, who rushed 24 times for 132 yards, and he also caught 4 passes for 21 yards. Eastern Oregon, unfortunately, I couldn't really find a player of the game as it was just a rather sloppy game. Eastern Oregon will play Arizona Christian next week, and Rocky Mountain will play College of Idaho next week. Your Southern Oregon Raiders played Montana Western and lost 23-24. Now, this is a tough loss for your Raiders. Southern Oregon was doing everything right as they entered into the fourth quarter, up 23-12. However, it would come crumbling down as Eli Norse would score 2 touchdowns in under 10 minutes to give Montana Western a win. However, the Raiders, who haven't beaten a team with a winning record on the road since 2017, made it interesting. They picked up 57 yards on 5 plays, but it was all for nothing, as the Raiders kicker missed a 49-yard field goal as time expired. Now, the Southern Oregon player of the game is QB Matt Struck, who went 20 of 32 for 242 yards and 2 touchdowns. Montana Western's player of the game, true freshman Eli Norse, who had 13 receptions for 169 yards and 2 touchdowns. Let's sum up his 2 touchdowns. The first was on a 28-yard pass with 9 minutes and 24 seconds left in the game. The second being the game-winning touchdown with 42 seconds left on the clock. Southern Oregon will play Montana Tech next week, where Montana Western will enjoy a bye next week. Over to Idaho. Your Boise State Broncos played San Diego State and came out on top 34-31. That's a pretty good game for the Broncos. Now, this game was back and forth throughout its entirety, but Boise State was held scoreless in the first quarter and exploded for 17 points in the second quarter. Now, I'm not going to act like Boise State has a crazy defense, because they don't. I will say, Ashton Jeanty is how Boise State's offense works. It runs through him. If he's out, I don't want to see what it looks like. If they're down, they know they're going to give him the ball in the passing game. If they're up, they're going to give him the ball to ice the game. It starts and stops with him. He's actually the player of the game because he ran for 205 yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as recovering the onside kick that SDSU attempted towards the end of the game. What can't he do? At this point, put him in on defense. Maybe he'll get some stops. Ashton Jeanty is not only the player of the game, but he's getting very close to being Boise State's player of the year. Boise State plays at Memphis next week. The Idaho Vandals played Sacramento State and won 36-27. Vandals win again. Now let's set the stage on why this was such a big one for Idaho. But first, let's get to know our opponent, Sacramento State. Sacramento State entered the game with a 22 regular season game winning streak and a 19-game Big Sky winning streak. On top of that, they ended up beating Stanford last week 30-23. You want to talk about hot? Sacramento is the state of that exactly. The Vandals went into halftime up 13-10, but the game was far from over. After a back and forth third and fourth quarter, Idaho drove down the field and kicked a field goal to be up 30-27. However, there was 1 second on the clock. Idaho kicked it off. Sacramento State would fumble it. Idaho State would recover the fumble and return it for a touchdown, having the score show as 36-27. But in all reality, this was a 30-27 game. Player of the game, Giovanni McCoy. He went 15-21 for 234 yards and 2 touchdowns. Here's some more fun facts about the Idaho game. Idaho was one of 5 FCS teams to open up the season on 3 true road trip games, meaning there was no neutral site. They went to their opponent's stadium and played there. It was the first top 10 matchup in the Kibbe Dome since the Vandals faced Northern Iowa in 1994. The Vandals are legit, and as I've said week after week after week, the Vandals might just end up running the table in the Big Sky. I could certainly see them being a top 3 team. The Vandals will travel to Cheney, Washington to face Eastern Washington next week. Your Idaho State Bengals beat Northern Colorado 35-21. Way to win a game, Bengals. The Bengals, after exchanging touchdowns with the Bears, decided they were done playing as they went into halftime up 35-21. From there, it was all gravy, including an interception including 2 interceptions in the final 4 minutes to ensure there would be no sort of comeback. The Bengals player of the game is junior safety Calvin Pitcher, who had 13 tackles for the Bengals. The College of Idaho Coyotes played Montana Tech and lost 35-44. The 15-ranked Yotes had a nice rest, but maybe it was too much, as the College of Idaho lost to a very good Montana Tech football team. The game was very back and forth, but what I think set the tempo of this game is when the Ore-Diggers picked a tip ball out of the air on just the second offensive play for the Yotes. This would lead to a touchdown to put the Ore-Diggers up 14-0. Going into the fourth quarter, it was looking like the Yotes might be able to pull something off, but the Oredigers stopped any idea of that happening as they actually forced a turnover on downs. This would turn out to be the last possession the Yotes would get in the entire game. Now, the Yotes player of the game is junior quarterback Andy Peters, who went 28 of 42 for a career best 354 yards and tied a career high 3 touchdowns. The Oredigers player of the game, junior DB Angel Sanchez, the third, who had 11 tackles on the entire day, including 2 assisted tackles. College of Idaho will welcome Rocky Mountain College to home next week in the homecoming game. Montana Tech will play Southern Oregon next week. Over to Montana. Your Montana Grizzlies played Northern Arizona and lost 14-28. This is shocking to say the least, and it has to hurt the Grizz. Sometimes the day isn't your day, and that day happened to be yesterday for the Grizz. NAU threw everything but the kitchen sink at Montana, and it worked. You have to be able to run the ball. I've said it on this podcast a million times. Montana couldn't run the ball, totaling 38 yards on the ground for the entire game. Sam Vidlac certainly didn't help Montana as he went 23 of 37 for 210 yards and a touchdown. He also lost a fumble and had an INT. Montana is without a player of the game. Montana will look to bounce back against Idaho State next week. University of Montana Bobcats beat Weber State 40-0. Complete and total domination. Montana won the state in convincing fashion, and there wasn't any pushback from Weber. None. Now, the MSU player of the game is Sean Chambers, as he went 8 of 17 for 172 yards and 2 touchdowns, while rushing 12 times for 114 yards and another 2 touchdowns. MSU will face Portland State next week, and Weber State will face Northern Colorado next week. Your Carroll Fighting Saints beat Arizona Christian University 35-20. Carroll finally gave us a win in which we didn't need to have a medic on standby. After feeling each other out for the first half, the Saints got it humming in the second and won the game in convincing fashion. The Saints player of the game is Duncan Kraft, who had 97 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Carroll will play MSU Northern Lights next week. Over to Wyoming, where your Wyoming Cowboys played Appalachian State and won 22-19. Now, the Cowboys love to play it to the last minute, no matter how much it scares everyone. Going into the fourth, with 2 minutes left in the game, the score was 19-15 until a miracle happened. Wyoming's Ja'Cory Hawkins returned a blocked punt 62 yards for a touchdown with less than 2 minutes to go. This gave Wyoming the spark they needed. The Cowboys player of the game is junior running back Harrison Whaley, who had 17 rushes for 156 yards and 1 touchdown. Wyoming will play New Mexico next week. Over to Utah. Your BYU Cougars played Kansas and lost 27-38. Welcome to the conference, BYU. BYU was up 17-14 at half, but Kansas outscored the Cougars 21-3 in the second half, beginning with a pick 6 on BYU's first possession. As I've always said, you have to be able to run the ball. And BYU couldn't do that this game, going for 9 yards on 22 attempts. BYU's player of the game was Ben Bywater, who had 10 tackles and a sack. BYU will play Cincinnati next week. The Utah Utes played UCLA and won 14-7. Now, the Utes continue to find ways to win, and they're doing it right now without a great quarterback under center. So imagine how good they'll be when Cam Rising is back. Defense wins championships. And it was truly impressive here as they held Chip Kelly's offense to 9 rushing yards. I find this impressive because for those of you who remember Chip Kelly, he was over at Oregon for years. He was in the NFL for a little bit as well. He was at New Hampshire before that. He's been known to have all these explosive offenses who put up points, up tempo. There is no slowing them down. You can just hope to contain them. And when I say contain them, I mean they don't score 40 on you. But I never thought I would actually see a day where Chip Kelly's offense scored 7 points in a game and struggled to do so. On offense, Utah finished the game with 219 yards, including 102 yards rushing and 117 yards passing, so extremely balanced. The Utes also recorded 13 first downs and won the time of possession battle 34-28. Now, for a UCLA squad like Chip Kelly's, that doesn't matter. They don't care about time of possession. But when you're playing Chip Kelly's offense, you definitely do. Because if you can ground and pound the ball and get that defense tired, the offense is still going lightning speed. So let's say you ground and pound the ball for 8 minutes. You end up punting. Chip Kelly's offense runs down the field and scores a touchdown in 2 plays. You're not happy you gave up a touchdown, but that defense has only had 2 minutes to rest. Your offense, who's ready and built for long drives, is ready to go right back at it. It's a double-edged sword, but you have to hope when you're Chip Kelly's team, you can just go, and keep scoring. Sometimes your defense gets the worst of that. And just like today, Utah held onto the ball for 34 minutes and 28 seconds and was able to just impose over and over and over again. Utah's player of the game, Jonah Ellis, who had 10 tackles with 3.5 sacks and 5 tackles for a loss. He played out of his mind. Utah will play at Oregon State next week, facing an Oregon State team looking for revenge. Your Utah State Aggies played James Madison and came up short 38-45. I don't know how to sum this up. The Aggies were down 24 early in the second quarter. And from there, the Aggies would play pretty well, but the issue is you can't go down 24 points against a quality opponent like James Madison and expect to win. Utah State needs to figure out what they're going to do because they're sitting at 1-3 and slowly watching their season slip away. I do want to comment and give them a shout out for going all in on true freshman quarterback McKay Hillstead. They're accepting the good with the bad. He went 25 of 47 for 399 yards, the good 4 touchdowns, and the bad 3 interceptions. For those of you wondering, those passing yards were the most for a freshman by Aggie history. Player of the game, senior Terrell Vaughn, who caught 10 passes for 124 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Utah Tech Trailblazers played Missouri State and lost 14-59. The players got absolutely mollywopped by the Bears. The Utah Tech defense, after forcing a season-high 5 turnovers last week, picked up right where it left off, forcing a pair of fumbles on the Bears' first 2 possessions of the game. However, they weren't able to capitalize on either of them, and from there, the game got out of hand, as indicated by the final score. Utah Tech does not have a player of the game, and Utah Tech will play at Colorado State next week. Your Southern Utah Thunderbirds played Western Illinois University and won 37-17. Let's dive right into it. Going into the third quarter, the score was tied 17-17. But from there, the Thunderbirds would have a rushing touchdown in the third quarter, a passing touchdown in the fourth quarter, and to put some icing on the cake, they had a 60-yard pick six to assure the game was out of reach. The Thunderbirds player of the game, senior quarterback Justin Miller, who went 24 of 35 for 242 yards and 2 touchdowns. Southern Utah will play Central Arkansas next week. Now I want to talk about our game of the week. I have it as Utah at Oregon State next week. I think the final score is going to be 24-17 Utah. But I think this game has too much at stake for either team to come out flat. Oregon State just lost to WSU, and they need a win here to keep their Pac-12 hopes alive. They need to prove they belong with the big boys. Utah has yet to play a pretty game, and they might not until Cam Rising's back. However, this could be the game he returns. Utah needs to win this game to continue their hopes against a tough Pac-12 schedule. And at the end of the day, this game could very well decide the fate for each one of these Pac-12 teams. Now, these are both hard-nosed teams, so I don't think if one team loses, they're just going to roll over for the rest of the year. But if Oregon State has 2 losses on their record, they're going to need help from other teams to get where they want to be. And you never want to rely on someone else deciding your fate. You want to decide your own. Utah, on the other hand, is trying to win, and they got a hard schedule ahead of them. This game, in my opinion, is the biggest game the Pac-12 has seen so far through this year. Yes, the Wazoo-Oregon State game was huge, but with the outcome of that game, this Oregon State-Utah game now means infinitely more. Oregon State has a plan Oregon State has the potential to ruin Utah's year and put them in a terrible position, well, Oregon State has a chance to potentially have their season ruined with a loss here. Now, I'm not saying a 2-loss team is a bad season, but I'm saying when your hopes were college football playoffs, you had a dark horse Heisman contender potentially in DJU who has not lived up to expectations. His first game against a real opponent, and he struggled mightily. I don't know what you do here for Oregon State. I don't know if it's time to hit the red button and full-on panic, but we're definitely in the yellow. We're definitely worried. Now, the player of the week, no one is going to deny it. It's Cam Ward, right? He passed for 404 yards and accounted for 5 scores. Cam Ward entered this game third in the nation in passing yards and fourth in total offense. Yet we haven't heard his name mentioned in the Heisman race at all. Open up your freaking eyes. Did this game do enough for him to finally get Heisman recognition? I hope so. Being quite frank, the rest of the year for WSU, as I see it, only really has 4 more tough opponents: UCLA, Oregon, Colorado, and UW. To be entirely honest, I only really see 2 threats, which is Oregon and UW. UCLA is a tough game, but they play them not next week, but the week after a bye week. And I only really worry about that because, again, it's Chip Kelly's offense. And for those of you who may remember, there was a game a couple years ago where I believe Wazoo was up by like 28 and ended up losing to UCLA. Oregon just dominated Colorado, and they are making noise consistently. Colorado is good in the skill position, but as Oregon just proved, their O-line cannot do anything. I think R.J. Stone and Brennan Jackson can take care of that. So really, I'm worried because of Coach Prime and where they're going to be at the end of the year, but I don't know if they're good. You can't fix O-line play. And Deion's been honest to it, right? Deion said multiple different times, wait, let me get my guys here. Give me 2 years to get some big boys up front. We'll see what happens. So, yeah, let's give them 2 years and let's see where it is. But if Wazoo wants to strike right now, they need to strike while the iron's hot, and that's this year while Deion's down. And UW, it's rivalry every year, every single year. And it might not be anymore because UW decided to leave for the Big Ten, where they're going to go be a doormat, but neither here nor there, right? UW has the ability to go and be a really, really good team. But I don't know if you remember, there was about 5 years there where I believe it was 2015 through 2018, where I believe the champion of the Pac-12 North was decided by the Apple Cup. Now, unfortunately, Wazoo came up short in all of those games, but that doesn't take away from how big of a game this is, right? It's already rivalry week. You already hate your opponent. The fact that UW just left the Pac-12 to go to the Big Ten because they wanted more money makes this game that much more bitter. You don't think Wazoo wants to go in there and win this game on UW's home field? Oh, this game's going to be crazy, and I cannot wait to see what happens. You never want to lose a game. And if you're Wazoo in this scenario, you can't lose a game for the rest of the year. I think they can beat UW, but I really see a tough schedule ahead in the 2 opponents that I just named, Oregon and UW. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into it, right? That was a little rant there. But I'm sure we will have a deep dive into each of these games, especially if Wazoo is undefeated going into them. Now, my upset of the week. Look, I know you guys think I don't like UW. I actually do admire them. I think they're really good. But I think the upset of the week is Arizona over UW. And I get it. Oh, Jay, you don't know football. But hear me out. Arizona isn't necessarily a good team, and UW is a very good team. So automatically you're thinking, trap game. Let me give you some more details. Arizona barely beat Stanford, and Stanford just lost to an FCS team last week. So blah, 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 say all your hate. But Arizona has this guy named Jaden DeLaura. Now, he left the game last week against Stanford with a leg injury early in the 4th. But if he's able to play, he's dynamic. And Jaden DeLaura, now, I don't know if you remember him, but he was the guy that Wazoo had as their quarterback when they went into UW and beat UW in the Apple Cup, and it was Wazoo's first Apple Cup win since 2012. Now, I don't think Arizona is necessarily the best team, but I think with de Laura, you have enough opportunity and a quarterback who can move around and scramble and throw at different arm angles to make this game a game. So I see this going either one of two ways. Either UW demolishes Arizona, I'm talking 60 points plus, or the Wildcats win a crazy lucky game. Crazier things have happened. UW fans, I know you remember going to the desert. It's not fun for some weird reason. Even over here in Pullman, when they go down to the desert, crazy, crazy things happen. I don't know why it keeps happening, but it does. Your Seattle Seahawks played extremely well, winning their game against the Panthers 37-27. First of all, shout out to all the 12s. You all forced 8 false start penalties on the Panthers. That's an amazing game, and that truly changes the game. After an absolutely abysmal first half from Geno Smith, he really turned it on in the second half. He was making the right plays at the right time and hitting players who, frankly, I didn't think he was even able to hit at some of the angles he was doing, especially in the first half when it looked like he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. We have rookies making impacts all over the field, but it may not be who you think it is. JSN has been almost gone and missing from this offense. But Zach Charbonnet is starting to prove why Pete Carroll and John Schneider drafted him where they did, as him and K9 are slowly forcing and becoming what I think is one of the best backfield tandems in all of the NFL. I think if we give it some time, we might be looking at this draft pick as an absolute steal. JSN, I'm sure, will get acclimated and become a part of the team, but right now, we don't really know what his role is besides just a third receiver behind Lockett and Metcalf, which is nothing to sneeze at because those two, in my opinion, are top 15 to 20 wide receivers in the entire NFL. Player of the game, Kenneth Walker, right? Can't be understated. He had 18 carries for 97 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Hawks are going to play the Giants on Monday Night Football next week, which, on a side note, I wanted to remind people, these are released Monday mornings as a way of having a weekend update for you. Because of that, we're not going to have the Seahawks update on next week's Monday or weekend update. Unfortunately, that's not something we're able to do. However, if you guys comment and if you guys want, we can cover the Giants game the following week. As always, guys, this is a work in progress, right? I know I keep saying it, and we're in week 4 now, and we're like, Jay, figure out what you're doing. But I want the feedback. I want us to work together to find something that works for everyone. So please, leave comments, send an email, anything you guys want. Let's make this something we love. Have a great day. Goodbye.